Good evening. It is April 17th, and I would like to welcome everyone to the Curriculum Committee meeting. Is there any public comment on tonight's agenda? All right, seeing none, I will turn the meeting over to Mrs. Grigaitis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Petruno. Welcome everyone this evening. The agenda we have set for tonight, we have switched things around a little bit, and we're going to start with our conference showcase so that our presenters are going to be able to get to their families if they so choose. We are going to discuss the P&C conference, and then we are also going to share a little bit from the Literacy Symposium. We are going to do a little bit deeper dive into structured literacy and what that is going to mean for the Colonial School District in the coming year. And we're also going to talk about our Title III funding, as well as our English language development programming. And we're also going to talk about setting goals across the curriculum. And we have quite a few conference requests for your approval this evening. Perfect. So without further ado, we are going to welcome up our participants that went to the P&C conference. They're going to have the pleasure of introducing themselves, their schools, their roles, and then talk to us about the lovely conference you went to.
Present noodle.
And we started to expand. Then we started to expand to not just having it be for a bibliography or works cited, but how to be able to have teachers be able to almost have real-time feedback rate with their students. They can pop in on the students' work, leave comments, have that feedback, that back and forth with the student present or.
And Brian and I shared together because we've built kind of a 6 through 12 vertical alignment. So in 6th grade, we start with very simple topics, very simple note cards. And it's nice to give our students a skill that's not unique to the grade, that follows them through high school. They're able to use this as a tool that's available for college students as well. So they start out with a 3 to 5 note card, one source project in 6th grade. And then by the time they get to Brian and they're in IB research seminar, AP research seminar, how many sources? And we were also able to share features that we've been using. Some of the people who attended our session also use Noodle Pools, but didn't realize how robust it was, how many options there are, how many ways there are to support students. It was a success. And all three of us attended different breakout sessions on artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence probably popping up in your news. It is probably coming across all kinds of platforms for you. So we looked at ways to leverage AI to increase productivity for teachers, to expand learning and questioning skills. I think one of our big takeaways is we want to approach this as a way to empower students to teach them to use AI. How do they get the answers that they want, instead of just fearing it and thinking, how do we chat GPT proof all of our essays?
So two of my biggest takeaways from the conference were Minecraft for Education. I was able to see 2 presentations on that and how it can be utilized in the classroom, helping students creatively engage in ways to build things and use that for their learning. The 6th grade science team is going to implement it in the next unit, where we're going to do a biome project, and the students are going to build a world in Minecraft and do the research for the biome. So very exciting, fun, game-based students are going to use this year. I got to visit a booth that was Fork Farms, and they had a cool, very interesting hydroponic system where you can grow lettuce. So in that, they say 30 pounds in 30 days is like the maximum yield for the Fork Farms, and we started utilizing that in our classrooms already, and we're going to also tie that into the 6th grade ecology unit. So at the time, I just thought it was an interesting thing, and now we're putting that into place too.
So I also had an opportunity to talk to a presenter and visit a session on a student-run help desk. And since coming to the high school, it's something that we've been talking about and trying to figure out, is there a way that we can do this and be able to get, students that we have in the building that have an interest, have a skill set, that want to be able to assist in some way. Obviously, this is not giving them access to the network or anything like that, but more like that first stop, almost customer service-ish role there. With almost the one-to-one of devices, I mean, we have devices that get damaged, that need a loaner, that need replacement, and trying to figure out a way to get students involved in that process to help with that process, as well as maybe making a tutorial, talking to freshmen and saying, what are things that, you just were confused about when you got here that just didn't get answered, and how to be able to use them to help propel this for us. The gentleman I talked to, they just got it up and running, and we all had similar questions. So I don't know if I came back with more answers or more questions, but either way, it was something to still considering how we can do this.
So ultimately for us, the value was both as presenters and really as learners was connecting with tech-forward educators throughout the state. A lot of this will be turned around at our best practices fair in the fall. This is information we want to share with our peers. And I just wanted to share with you that we used AI to create this slide presentation. So we're turning it around already, implementing it. So thank you.
And Brooke, you took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to tell everybody that we're looking forward to these presentations to be turned around for everyone at our best practice fair. Do we have any questions from the board for our participants? No? Thank you all very much. Have a great evening. And now we are going to look forward to hearing a little bit more about our literacy symposium, but I'm thinking we have some technical problems. Not anymore.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Caslow. I'm one of the reading specialists here at CES. And back on March 13th, I got to attend the reading symposium at AIM Academy with another reading specialist from CES and a special education teacher. And the topic was, why is reading comprehension so difficult to comprehend? We were really intrigued by this because so much of what we're hearing
Okay, I do have a couple of questions. When we talk about content knowledge, and we have students, like you mentioned, of various levels and skills and background, what are the steps that they recommend to take to make sure that students have the ability to just relate to some of the text? And I think about a lesson I observed where the teacher's teaching about a whirlpool. And that's not something that people have had exposure to, that, many students have had exposure to. So trying to get students to understand the bulk of the text when it's talking about a whirlpool, and a lot of students don't even have exposure to that. And that wasn't here, but it was someplace else. So I'm thinking about when we look at text in spaces like that, and there's a content or a space that children just don't have the background connectivity to, they don't have the exposure to those experiences. What is the recommendation for how we bring that to students so that they can understand the text itself?
One of the things that we use as an intervention in special ed with that for reintroducing or introducing background knowledge, one of the programs that we use is Read 180. And Read 180 is really very big at introducing information that students will need to be able to comprehend text, such as what Becky was just talking about with, little film clips, small articles, things that kids can reference now and refer to in order to comprehend something that they're going to read later.
And one of the kids right away, we were looking at studying geography, geology, and ecology, and it's geology, and the one boy was like, what about that in Lexia? I know what geology is. So our program Lexia is what we have.
And I think,
Go ahead.
I was just going to reiterate the cross-curricular connections that we do that help build a lot of that background knowledge for our students. And with all of our lessons in our literacy classrooms, as well as all of our classrooms, we work on building that content knowledge first, the background knowledge, realizing that not all of our students, especially our Ls, don't have that language issue. So concerns, we're building that for them. Sorry, Gary.
No, you're good. My question was regarding the developmental language disorder and dyslexia. Were there discussions around how you all the symptoms to look for? Because sometimes kids even adults are embarrassed about having disorder because it's a label. And so was there any discussion about identifying through certain symptoms to look for?
Well, I was talking about that. I would have to give you an idea that, oh, this could be.
And when we're talking about the interventions, we rely a lot on our GAIN block, our TII block. And it's not so much what we're labeling the concern or the challenge to be, it's actually the symptoms or what the gap is, and that's what we're treating. And we fill those holes as we go. Once we fill one hole, we then go on and fill another hole.
I have a question in how, so I know that we teach for the content and we watch the kids grow, and that's our focus, right? But then you have these state assessments, right? So in understanding where this is coming from, if they're given, and I haven't looked honestly at a PSSA in like 10 years, but are they kind of catching up to these theories because my understanding is that, say, in third grade or fifth grade, they're given a paragraph and then they're asked a bunch of questions about how did they comprehend the paragraph. So are the topics, like, how do you equate that to,
Thank you very much for your expertise. All right, and much of what we just heard was about the shift we are going to have to structured literacy. So Mr. Paccetti is going to share a little bit more with us about what it is and what are we going to see.
I'm going to divide this into two separate prongs. The first is going to be a focus on the operational or kind of the policy considerations around what structured literacy is, what the state is asking us to do, and how quickly we need to do that. And then the more salient kind of instructional pieces are going to be addressed by two members of our team from Plymouth Elementary, Liz Morris and Jen Ramsden. So they'll be speaking more specifically to some of the takeaways that they've had from professional development opportunities they've had, as well as plans moving forward. So in terms of what structured literacy is, currently many districts in the county, and we will be one of the first to transition fully to a structured literacy framework, engage in balanced literacy. And balanced literacy is not something that we are endorsing, the state is endorsing, or research is endorsing as a tool. Instead, the focus is going to be on structured literacy. So what that effectively means, I have the definition here. This is from Chapter 49, which is the governance that we have from PA State Code that basically articulates what professional development needs to look like, as well as programming at each of the districts in the Commonwealth. So structured literacy is a systematic, explicit instruction that provides a strong core of foundational skills in the language systems of English, integrates listening, speaking, reading, spelling, and writing, and emphasizes the structure of language across the speech sound system, which is phonology, the writing system, which is orthography, the structure of sentences, which is syntax, the meaningful parts of words, which is morphology, the relationships among words, which is semantics, and the organization of spoken and written discourse. All districts in the Commonwealth, pre-K through 8, have to have a structured literacy framework in by the end of next year. Not this coming year, but the following. A lot of this is because emerging research, as presenters have intimated so far, we know how students learn to read, and what is best is the science of reading kind of corpus of research that we want. For Colonial, there were a couple considerations. If we were taking a look at where we were and where we're going when it comes to moving from a balanced literacy framework to a structured framework, we have a lot of the pieces already in place. Our core programming includes things like Foundations, which is a research-based system that's very explicit and systematic. That is available for all of our students K through 2. We also have plans for expansion of that, which I'll get into a little bit later. Basically, there's one primary piece that the state is asking folks to change, which is what we would consider our guided reading block, which would now be a literacy block, where students are not pulled according to their reading levels, according to something called the benchmark assessment system. So many of you, if you have kids, you've seen, I'm reading at an A, I'm reading at a B, C, and so on, all the way up through Z. That system is not something the state is endorsing as research-based. Instead, students will be pulled skill groups, which a couple of our presenters will go into later in greater detail later on. So what does that mean in terms of considerations that we have from a systems level? We're looking at funding considerations. So currently what we're doing is looking at acquiring Foundations Level 3, which again is already part of our core programming K through 2 for our grade 3 classrooms. That's going to ensure continuity that is sorely needed for many of our learners, and will make sure that they have a smooth transition moving into grade 4. There's also a focus on something called decodable readers, which again, Jen and Liz will get into greater detail in terms of what those are and how they function. We're also taking a look at our existing resources, which are very aligned currently with many of the structured literacy framework recommendations, and seeing how we can allocate those effectively, both in an intervention setting and in our core programming for our Tier 1 students. Of course, we're looking at professional development. We want to emphasize in-person trainings. We are obviously sending folks to literacy symposiums, Title I conferences. This is the buzz right now, right? Structured literacy there are a number of different sessions there. And right now, what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that we have available to folks in-person trainings for any needs that there might be. And we've already done a needs assessment for where our teachers are at and what they require in terms of those needs. Currently, there are some asynchronous trainings available, which a couple of our teachers are doing across grade levels K through 5 through SAS and Patan, which are our two major organizations that provide that type of training. We're also looking at evaluative considerations here. So we are coming up with architecture for what fidelity checks may look like. What exactly does this look like in the ground when I'm in with a teacher? Learning walks for teachers that would be non-evaluative in nature, and whatever data we happen to have, and how we take a look at it, and how they shift our understanding of how to group students. We identify certain needs based on literacy outcomes.
Can I ask a question now, or do you want me to wait?
Absolutely, please.
So if you go, you don't have to go back in the slides, but when you looked at the slide at what the state code said,
Yes.
to me, that was a lot of words that like parents like, what does that all mean? Like, we all know what phonics is. We all know, context clues and all that. So what is the difference? So what will parents see as a difference in what their kids are how they're going to approach the reading skills? And what are students going to, like, what differences are the students going to see in, how they're going to be learning moving forward?
Would you mind humoring me and act like a parent and I'm giving you a conference right now?
Oh, I'm really good at that.
That would be great. Thank you. So if I'm sitting down with you and we're reviewing your child's progress, if I say that they're reading at a level B right now, what does that mean to you?
To me, I know the leveled reading system. So it's 2 and 3 letter words and understanding that. But, whereas level M is more like talking about Magic Tree House and things like that. So,
Exactly. And there's a lot of very discrete metrics that are used to determine what that looks like. One of the issues that the state has pointed out is if I say that they're reading on a level M, my M may look very different from Mrs. Gaitis' M when we're giving that assessment. And depending on where that student falls, their groupings may be different. They may not be getting what. So if you're a parent sitting in a conference with you now in a structured literacy setting, there are 5 foundational pieces of literacy that, again, Liz and Jen will go over in greater detail. But let's say it's comprehension. Becky gave a great example of what background knowledge is required in order to comprehend it. If we know that that's a need, I can now say, Chris, here is a number of resources in terms of some skills that you can practice as a child. Here's what we're seeing in the classroom to help facilitate greater understanding. Because we notice, like, they're reading quickly, great word identification, their orthography or their writing is right where it needs to be. But one of the biggest problems is that, there's some background knowledge. So we want to provide you in that conference with a series of resources to help facilitate conversations. What it allows us to do is really hone in and put parents, frankly, with the correct verbiage and things that are going to be more accurate to help the child's development and literacy.
So what would the 3rd grader notice in 4th grade when they get to 4th, like the difference? What would they notice in a lesson?
What would the teacher notice, or what
would the student, like, would the student see that there might be a difference in how they did their reading before, or?
So it depends on where. So we use DIBELS to assess whether or not where a student is at in each of these different categories, right? So we drive all of our instruction on data, and that's one of the primary data points. So what a student may see, and as we see, like in 3rd and 4th grade in particular, comprehension becomes things that we need to focus on as an outcome. But we also know, for example, that for structured literacy, an understanding of phonology or sounds, that's not something many 4th and 5th grade teachers had training in, just because their certification didn't require it. They didn't avoid it. What this allows those educators to do now for those students who are seeing it, they'll have continuity of understanding what exactly is expected of me if I have some fun. If I'm having some challenges, comprehension, I know that I'm getting the same type of skill group training that I received in previous. It just, the complexity of the text becomes a little.
Okay, thanks.
Great question. And thank you. So in terms of what the framework looks like for implementation here, I had mentioned at the beginning, we are ahead of, I'm proud to say, every district in Montgomery County, because we've already done a lot of the groundwork with our benchmark workshop program, which is our core reading and shared reading program. Foundations, we have 95% group. We have a number of interviews that are research-based. So we're really very close to doing this. Really, it's just a shift, not a complete overhaul, shift. So for 2022 and 23, we had a few plans or a few goals in mind. We will not be using BAS or LLI, which again is not an endorsed measure anymore from the state, after this last administration at the end of the year. So teachers will have the ability to group students based on BAS or those reading levels at the end of this academic year, but moving into the next year, that will no longer. And we'll talk about how those students will be assessed in addition to DIBELS, in addition to formative checks, summative checks, and a number of other areas. We have different diagnostic tools in place and are exploring a couple of other ones to help drive that. Literacy teams right now are getting trained, as you've seen. We have a number of our literacy team members here this evening in structured literacy and the science of reading. So that in addition to conferences, it's also, we've been doing, book studies, Canvas books, uploaded with a series of documents and resources. All of our meetings utilize this as a main, so we're getting training in that. We're looking at the definition of roles for our literacy teams. We have this CAP document, which I'm not going to open because it is enormous and frankly not very exciting. This document for your review, if you are so intrigued, it is basically delineates all of the resources that we have in each individual area of literacy or domain of literacy and what it supports and how we deploy it for students. So it's a comprehensive document that does go over that. We're reviewing our GAIN resources and allocating or reallocating them as necessary. We will also be keeping the books in terms of operational stuff. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. We will be keeping the books that are the leveled readers. We just won't be utilizing the levels. So we're using our existing resources and repurposing them to make sure that they're adhering to structured literacy guidelines. Looking forward to next year, professional development really is the hyper focus for our team and ensuring that all teachers, K through 8, have this exposure. We wanted to divide it into 2 bands. K through 5 will be together, and then 6 through 8. The needs of those 2 different bands are very different. The needs of those students are very different. But we want to assure that our teachers that they have a framework off of which they can operate and have very clear guidance moving into the summertime and then going into next year for what this looks like where the rubber meets the road for their instruction every single day. We'll also be taking a look at different data review cycles for improvement, potentially doing a 6-week cycle or a PLT cycle. We're still considering what would be the most effective. And then monitor skill-based instructional delivery through walkthrough probes and other types of data analysis. So this is our implementation plan leading up to year 3, which would be full implementation and monitoring.
Quick question. You had mentioned that there will be an assessment using BAS at the end of this school year. It won't carry into next year, but will there be another assessment in September? And the reason I'm asking this question is, if it is there an expectation for there to be a major difference in assessments for our students? Because I'm understanding that the assessment done at the end of the year kind of loosely dictates where they'll be the following year. So just trying to understand how does that, if it's different starting the year, how does that change and how does that impact the student?
That's a great question, Gail. So they'll be utilizing that letter to help their initial groupings moving into September. Come September, DIBELS is the one test administered that we have been using consistently for years. We're going to continue to use that at the beginning, middle, and end of the year. What that allows us to do is progress monitor our students, group them intelligently, regroup them when needed, and then really hyper-focus on those skills. So DIBELS is the primary measure, but instead of BAS, Lexile measures, which gives us a range of where students are reading. The measure's been around for quite some time, but what it allows is greater flexibility on the behalf of the teacher to help match a text within a certain range to their interest levels. Also, what that allows us to do also, frankly, is be more culturally responsive, linguistically responsive to the needs of our individual students. A lot of the times, the BAS books are very hyper-focused on animals, and you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe most of them are about animals, which is all well and good. There's nothing wrong with it. But a lot of our students are not seeing themselves in the experience of literature, even in those foundational literacy skills. So we want to make sure that those Lexile measures will allow us greater latitude in selections for our kids.
We will also continue to be using our Linkit benchmark assessments, and then we also use diagnostic assessments when we really need to drill down to the specific needs of our students.
So continuing to use the DIBELS assessment, I think you mentioned a parent comes in, you say you're on a level B, that really doesn't necessarily translate for parents, but where will they find out? The question I always ask is he reading on grade level? And is he on grade level, above grade level, below grade level, which then translates to my next question of what do we need to do to get him on grade level? So what assessment or what will parents hear so that they can understand that and receive that information?
Yeah, excellent question, Judy. So one of the things that Dibbles, which has now moved over to M-Class, so Becky earlier had mentioned Amplify. So that company has now purchased a number of different interfaces. One of them is M-Class. We administer Dibbles digitally now, and one of the remarkable tools that it provides is a front-facing parent resource. So if I'm a teacher having a conference, much like I did with Miss Epstein just a moment ago, if I happen to have available to me each of those individual skill areas, and I notice that, let's say not comprehension, but maybe fluency may be a concern, or oral reading fluency is a concern for my child. Now I, as the teacher, can sit down with the parent or send to the resources that are automatically generated from both that. I can also utilize my Lexia resources where the student is working with computer adaptive models. Those are both in paper and digital, so we have multiple formats. In many cases, these are also accessible to our English learners. Many of these resources can be translated into target languages. They're expanding those offerings, but it's a good start. So effectively what that does is allows me as a parent to better understand, well, what is oral reading fluency, number one, and how do I help my child at home? Well, here I can a whole bunch of materials and walk and assist them in the process. So grade level reading is really determined by each of those sub-scores.
So I'm a parent. In this meeting, you just told me that my child needs more assistance or support in oral reading fluency. And my response is, okay, but is he reading on grade level? Or my response is, if he does that better, will he be on grade level? Is that what that helps me understand? Or is that where you tell me, okay, this is where we're going to guide him into gain to get additional support in this space? I guess my question is, as a parent, ultimately, is my child reading where he's supposed to be reading at this point in time? In October of his third grade year, is he 3.3 or 3.5 in March, whatever the case may be? 3 years and 5 months into the school year, is he where he's supposed to be, and is he making gains? How do we communicate, if this is where we're shifting to, how do we communicate to parents that difference so we're not hung up on, but is he reading on grade level? But is he reading on grade level? What can I do to get him to read on grade level?
Yeah. And so there are, and Rosemary, do you want to interject? You do.
Joe constantly is making fun of me because I'm always interjecting in his meetings, but this is one of my passions, as our guest later will explain to you at Plymouth Elementary. But great questions. One of our communication efforts is going to be working with our teachers so that they can better explain to our families the differences we are going to be seeing. The research, the brain research behind all of this is not saying that we were teaching reading wrong in any way, shape, or form, but the way that we were teaching reading wasn't the best for the brain development. So we will be working with, I said, our teachers and our families to better explain the skills behind each level of developing a reader. BASS, and a lot of the ways that we were teaching our guided reading, we're working with predictable text. The belief behind it was we expose students to more and more reading, they're eventually going to get it. Well, what they eventually got was learning to memorize words, memorize predictable text, tell us what was coming next, but you put an unfamiliar word in front of them and they can't understand that. So we're shifting to where the brain research is telling us we need to show students how to decode those words, how to manipulate sounds with their brains. We will be developing a lot of that communication with our family. Sure. Sorry, Joe.
I apologize. Sometimes the high school English teacher in me comes out.
So can I ask a question? So
Yes.
then theoretically, would Jamina's question be broken down to, well, his phonology as a third grade level, but maybe his morphology is at a second grade level. So we're just breaking it down to subcomponents so that we can say, we need to strengthen this pillar of the chair or George's table or whatever. Is that the sort of the theory behind this?
We'll be strengthening those skills that lead to that next level. It won't be so scripted as your child's morphology level is this. So we'll be explaining what morphology is to our families because we'll need to do that. Exactly. We all learned something tonight. Yes. And that's okay. That's what we're trying to explain to everybody.
And actually, just to emphasize that point too, Rosemary said it's okay. That is one of the big messages that we're conveying to teachers as well, consistently throughout this past year and all through this process, which is this is going to look a little bit messy at times because while we can plan for everything possible and provide as many resources as possible, it is a shift for folks. And we want to make sure that we're sensitive to that. So we're encouraging folks to reach out. We're encouraging folks to acknowledge, like, if there's something that they don't know or they need an additional resource for, to reach out to us. We're here to support every step.
Does this go all the way, this is throughout the grade spans, I assume, this process?
Yes.
K to 8, okay. And I think this kind of goes back to what Gail had mentioned as far as assessments determining placement, particularly 8th grade into 9th grade. How do we, or what steps are we putting in place to utilize this data and this information that's no longer on grade level, below grade level, above grade level, to identify students and assess and determine their readiness for programming at the high school level, from honors English to, I don't know what the other options are. AP, thank you. In the 9th grade as they enter high school, right? So if it's no longer, the students who are performing above grade level go into, or for these courses, it's because it's now they have this part of the reading structure, but maybe not this part is as strong, then do you have to have all the parts at a certain performance level in order to be offered an honors course? Or can you have 3 out of the 5? I just want to make sure that we're really communicating that to parents, particularly as this is new for our 8th grade parents who are doing course selection for 9th grade, that we are able to offer students programming that they feel that they are ready for and their parents are supportive of them taking.
And just to be clear, BAS is the only assessment that we will not be utilizing. And the BAS does not have anything to do with anything of what you're talking about. That is just one measure that we use alongside of multiple measures. But even in the middle school, they only BAS our students that they consider to be struggling readers, and it's not the most authentic assessment to do that.
As part of the communication plan, is there a plan to have some set of workshops where it's face-to-face? And I asked that question because when my kids were in K through 3 and we changed the way we did math, it was very helpful because I was clueless. They would come home and I'm like, I want you to carry it. And they're like, that's not how we do math. And so we went to Ridge Park, and having had that workshop was very helpful for me because now I can sit down, because math is not my strongest subject. English was. So I was struggling trying to help my child. So just wondering if the face-to-face workshops would be something that would be inclusive of the communication.
Yes, it absolutely will be. And I can promise you that it is not going to nearly be as difficult as this shift to math.
I'm in the same place, Gail. Don't worry about it. All right. So without further ado, I will bring up Liz Morris and Jen Ramsden, one of our 3rd grade teachers, Liz from Plymouth, and Jen is a member of our reading team, to discuss in greater detail structured literacy, what it looks like. And
thank you. That's going to be a tough act to follow. A lot of the things that we're talking about tonight were already talked about, so we'll hopefully answer some of your questions. And great. Right, a lot of application, right? So thanks again for having us tonight. My name is Liz Morris. I'm currently a 3rd grade teacher at Plymouth Elementary, but I've had the pleasure of working both as a K-3 reading specialist and a classroom teacher during my time here in Colonial, which has afforded me the opportunity really to understand and appreciate not only the responsibilities of both roles, but also to value what we've been able to do here in Colonial as a reading team for our learners who benefit from more intervention, to literacy instruction in the classroom that addresses the needs of our at-risk population all the way to our accelerated. So, be a part of that.
Hi. I'm pleased as well to be here. My name is Jen Ramsden, and I have been a reading specialist in this district at one school, at Plymouth Elementary, for 12 years, but I am also a parent of 2 students in the district. So we have a 4th grader attending this school, but he, in his elementary career, went to Conshohocken Elementary and White Marsh Elementary. So it's really just the Ridge Park connection that I don't have. Rick and Gail can help me out with that, I think. Oh, I'm missing. Well, I can say that the 3 that I've had experience with are pretty phenomenal. So I'm happy to be here as both a reading specialist and a parent.
You didn't get the transfer paperwork that we put through?
Hopefully. Hopefully. Both hoping that. So, as we always start all of our great lessons with a learning intention for what we're doing this evening. So, what will you be learning? You will be able to identify structured literacy and name attributes of structured literacy. Why is this important to your learning? So that you can understand how this approach to teaching reading applies the science of reading, and how you know you're successful in your learning tonight. You will be able to explain structured literacy as an approach to teaching reading and name the attributes of structured literacy and how we use some of these components already in Colonial School District. Now, Joe has already taken my definition of structured literacy, so I have highlighted a few. Right, I've highlighted a few of the key words here in that definition of structured literacy. As you know, is an approach to teaching reading that is very systematic and explicit. And I won't go further because you already heard that. But the great news is we already are doing so much of this in Colonial since you've heard from, as you've heard from so many other people. So we'll just need to make some shift into some of the things and some of the practice that we've been using.
Thanks. So this is an infographic, and you may be familiar. It's showing up in a lot of articles and research. It is from Nancy Young, who was a teacher turned researcher, and she really spent a lot of time and research with the idea of dyslexia and the prevention of learning disabilities that may not truly be a learning disability, but just the result of inconsistent education, which can result in sometimes symptoms looking as though there is a learning disability. So this was the ladder to really answer the question, who is structured literacy for? And the answer is all. It's helpful for all students. So the breakdown there, it shows the top in green. That would be like your top 5 to 10% of students where reading is just effortless. It's just going to come naturally for them. Moving down slightly, that's like the next 35, 40% of students who will also learn to read with relative ease. To combine that percentage, those are the kids that really, we just need to show up for them and they're going to get it. And that's not enough though. If you do that quick math, that's still leaving over half of our population of students who are left sort of to the devices of whatever classroom they may be sitting in. And we're really lucky that our students and my children and your, the families in the building, that they're sitting in the classrooms of Colonial, because we've recognized that. And it's really cool to have this presentation and say, oh, we've been doing many of these things for like 5, 6, 7 years. So we're not coming as a response to what is out. We're just shifting to become even better. So in regard to those students that fall into the category where it's just not happening with ease, it's necessary for explicit, systematic instruction. That systematic, explicit instruction is not harmful or holding back, which I think is a misnomer, to the students that it is coming with ease. All students learning to read, and I'm speaking from a K-3 background, they need the routines and the multiple exposure. So even though someone may say, I know it, we need you to know it with automaticity, and that's helpful for every student. So I did, you're gonna see a cameo. I actually received, can you go back one slide? I wanted to show we have embedded a lot of little videos just to show you, sometimes it's easier to see than hear what we're talking about. So when we talk about a routine, this was actually sent to me as a parent. My son was chosen to be the drill leader of Foundations for the day. So this is a first grade classroom, and this is something that you would see happening daily.
Please ask your friends for a lovely audience.
Where's my audience? Here we are! Oh, I coin oi. Oh, I coin oi. Oh, I boy oi. Oh, I boy oi. Oh, E-to-O. Oh, E-to-O. Oh, W snow O. Oh, W snow O. Oh, W plow. Ow! Oh, W plow.
Oh my goodness, Niobe, are you okay? Oh my goodness.
Right there at White Marsh in first grade, and they were OW ow, or they were, OU, sorry. Ow, ouch. So they were expressive in that. But you can tell that's not a detriment to be practicing those routines daily. So that leads us into our next slide, the characters.
So we thought it'd be helpful to line up some characteristics of what structured literacy is, but also look at some of the non-characteristics of structured literacy to make sure we understand the difference. So first, as we keep saying over and over, it has to be explicit, systematic phonics instruction. And explicit does not just mean having a teacher stand in front and just tell the students everything. It also can still be a multisensory approach of them engaging and doing things along with the teacher. We just don't want it to be a rote memorization of things like sight words. There still are other things that we can do and sounds and such that we can teach the students to understand, to read those words and also spell.
Next, we see the multisensory teaching, and you may hear that a lot, and you might hear it referenced as multiple modalities. But really, the research is showing us that if you can engage as many senses and tactile movement, things of that nature to what you're teaching, it's going to be embedded into a different part of the brain, which will be easily accessed for students. So that's why in our word study program in K2 with foundations, you'll see coming up, there are a lot of manipulatives, and students are moving things and making words and breaking them. And that's an example of what that multisensory teaching would look like. What it is not, for the non-characteristic, it is not the 3 cueing system in its nature as it has been in the past. And when I say 3 cueing systems, I mean the MSV, whereas I'm a reader and I get stuck on a word, what do I do? And some of our old prompting is now the shift that would change. I'm not going to encourage a student sitting at the table with me to look to the picture and try to guess what might make sense. That's not the most efficient and effective way to teach reading. What I want to do is instruct that student to look at the word, look for patterns they may have learned, look for clues that we have taught the whole group, and then I'm differentiating based on what that student needs and what they might need help with. That's one of the shifts.
And with that shift would come sequential teaching of literacy at multiple levels and with different books. I know we had already brought up lexile levels and things of that nature, and making sure that our teaching is moving in a logical order, still using those texts instead of, and I know Mrs. Gregatis already brought it up too, which was predictable text, which is something that we had used a little bit in the past, and we'll make sure that we are looking to make those shifts, because we certainly do not want the children predictable text more guessing, using things like picture clues, but also theming or sounding accurate in their reading because they could predict what was coming next. We want to make sure that they can accurately read the text in front of them.
So that's why we really want to emphasize using decodable text, especially at that K1 level when early reading skills are being developed. We don't want a student to follow the pattern that might say, the dog can, and they could read, air quotes, read that without really even paying attention to the word, to the print on the page. So we want the text in front of them to be decodable, to match the skills that we know that they have been taught, and to practice those skills in progression. So the decodable texts of the past, they really have come a long way. It's not jargony sounding words to follow a pattern. They really do make sense. We don't want our students ever reading something that seems like nonsense, but we also don't want them reading something that they could read by guessing what might come next without really putting the skills in place that we've taught them. That's also on the side of what the non-structured literacy, it wasn't that phonics was not included, but it was more the phonics matched the book, and lessons were very book driven in guided reading. So I may teach you words that you might see in this text, but they were coming without any scope and sequence. So it was at my discretion as a teacher what might be helpful. But that's not helpful to the learner as they progress. We need to know that things have been taught, and they've been taught in a sequential order. So the phonics are everyone in sequence.
And then that is where the diagnostic testing piece comes in that we had talked about before with, what we do have some of our readers that maybe even in the past came up on something like a BAS as a grade level proficient reader. But as they grew to become, a third grade student, you might start to notice that there's different holes, different things with their actual reading. And that diagnostic testing helps us to drill down and find those holes and start to fill those gaps. And that would really help us we can apply that to then our skill groups and be, filling in those things for those students before they move on to another grade level.
So really, we're shifting away from balanced literacy, and it's not our primary way of teaching reading, but a lot of what we're reading and learning and conferences that we attended, they're saying it's just, think of it as tools. Some were good and helpful. There was a lot of balanced literacy that taught students how to be independent and work with students and with or without a teacher. There was a small group. There were things that we have instilled in our students that are helpful, but now there are things that are less effective, and we are finding and have found some better replacements. So that's what we're moving into, and that's as we shift into structured literacy. Now, this is where you really get to see it in action, because we have learned it's easier to see something than explain something. So the first clip that we're going to open up here is under the phonemic awareness. So what you're looking at on this slide are the 6 elements of reading taken from the research and the science of reading. So breaking them down into categories, phonemic awareness, and I won't read it to you, but it's basically the sounds. The phonemes are the sounds, and having an awareness means a student's able to manipulate those sounds. So we're going to show you a few seconds of a kindergarten classroom in a Haggerty lesson, manipulating those sounds and words.
Echoes, stack. Stack. Change to sn, and the word is snack. Stare. Stare. Change to sk, and the word is scare. Sling. Sling. Change sl to st, and the word is sting. Spear. Spear. Change p to sm, and the word is smear. Swoop. Swoop. Change swup to st, and the word is stoop.
So then when we move over to the next column of orthography, you're going to see another kindergarten class here using orthographic mapping to spell sight words. And as our now kindergarten students use these as heart words, like words that they need to memorize by heart. But as when we looked at the characteristics of structured literacy versus the non-characteristics,
Our word is should. Can you say our word?
Remember
Should.
that we don't necessarily need to have rote memorization of our sight words. And this is going to be a prime example of kindergarten students using that orthographic mapping to learn their sight.
Let's tap our words. Use your circles on your map. Should. How many sounds are in the word should, Nava?
3.
There's 3. So we're going to use all 3 boxes today. The first sound is sh. We spell that normally. How do we spell sh? Go ahead, Brayden.
S-H.
S-H. Can you put S-H in that first box? And I want you to hold on because that next sound is a little different. In the next box, we hear Normally that would be O-O, like the word book. But in this word, it's O-U-L. In the second box, can you put O-U-L? That's the heart part of this word, O-U-L. You can put a heart over it.
So I think you see a little snippet of the orthography being used.
Another element for us are semantics. That's study and the meaning of words. The meaning of words and relationships among words. So there is just a picture. I can just briefly talk to you. It's thinking of it as vocabulary, but one of the shifts that we're learning is vocabulary not in isolation, and also not only as the skill of vocabulary. So this is, if you looked at this matrix and you looked across snail, and we had read a story about how animals use their sense of smell. So snail uses tentacles. Okay, so what do you notice about the word snail? Well, it begins with a blend, SN. So going down the matrix, you would see the word snake. So snake also has that same characteristic of the blend, SN. And now I need to fill in that fourth box. What do snakes use to smell? I also need to follow the example of beginning with the consonant T, and the answer was tongue. So that's just another way of the relationship of words and meanings and semantics.
I know that you'll have access to this, so I won't show the following video, but under morphology, and I know that we already used that term tonight, is the meaningful units of the words. And it's also looking at our syllabication and everything in our words too, and the relationship among the words in language. Do you want to go ahead? Let me just finish up. Okay. And then syntax is the way in which we put our words together with our phrases, our clauses, our sentences. So that's another element of reading that we would be focusing on under structured literacy. And then the last piece there is discourse, which is extending the language, whether it's written or spoken, and conveying the actual meaning. And one shift that I did want to highlight that a lot of the teachers are using, especially when we get into the more second and third grade. I know a lot of people talked about where do we go, and actually Rebecca up here was already talking about, where do you then go with the comprehension piece of everything? And our book clubs that a lot of us are doing at school have made a shift. Instead of looking at it as looking at students as what level should they be reading, providing books and for their guided reading level, or dictating which books they're going to read. We have been giving students more choice to read books at their interest level. Give them that ownership over previewing text, using all of those skills and strategies we've taught them to know if a text is comfortable and of interest to them. And it has been quite amazing to see the students make those decisions about their learning, the engagement, the level of engagement, some of them even setting their own goals based on what they have been learning in their small group instruction to say, here's what I want to do personally in my book club this session. And a lot of the students have taken, it's amazing to see how much just that ownership over their learning that they've really, for lack of a better term, I guess they've risen to the occasion. Whereas if the teacher gave them the text, they might be a little more, not as willing to put their best foot forward. A lot of them, I'll hear students talk to each other about, what are you going to do tonight? Are you going to read the book and be more prepared for tomorrow? And just having those, they've really walked away with just a greater interest and really wanting to. So it's been a great shift. Oh, me again. If you saw me last time that I was here, I already talked about this, and I think actually Rebecca had this in her presentation. And here are just some visuals that support the science of reading. And again, we have our simple view of reading, which is that multiplication equation that reminds us that if either side of this is at 0, that our product is then 0. So it's very important to have both the word recognition and that language comprehension. It's just like anything, building a foundation of a building, even you want that foundation is very important, but without the other piece of it, without that language comprehension, you're not going to have your structure. Make sure that we're encompassing all of these in our instruction.
I think we're talking about asking the board to make a pretty major shift here. And I know we get into the vocabulary of how to do that, right? Syntax, phonemic awareness, but seeing the videos where you see the implementation so we can go from the boardroom to the classroom. And as Dr. Clay mentioned earlier, how do we explain to parents, like, this is what we're doing, and here's what we're going to produce. So the more we can produce, I think, those types of videos where we see what the end is, right? We have the end in mind, but the application is so valuable, and seeing our students produce it throughout the school year. So those are fantastic in addition to everything you guys are presenting. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but
thank you.
I just think that's important for that connection from the boardroom to the classroom is critical.
And we're seeing that connection with students in our schools. Like we are now seeing, so one of the videos that we didn't show was a second grade classroom where they were breaking apart a word into syllables and naming the syllable type. The ease with which they were able to do that now really is built upon the fact that in kindergarten, they began listening for those sounds and breaking them apart without print. So that's the phoneme piece, the listening. So now we have we have taught students, because it's been strategic and in a sequence, they're now applying those skills so they know to listen for it, and then they know how to actually bring it to text and break a word into those parts. I know for the sake of time, we did include this slide because if you notice the rectangles, so it's speaking to that Dr. Hattie's research that he's done with the effect size and what really gets, the biggest bang in education. And so the effect size, this active view of reading takes what you've seen on the last slide, but it bridges and it really focuses on the bridging processes. The effect size is huge. And one of the biggest bridging factors of becoming an actual reader is fluency. And I think the shift that we're learning now, that fluency is not about reading faster, but it's really a link to comprehension. If you are a fluent reader, you are able to read with prosody, with automaticity, and with inflection and emotion because you understand what you're reading. And that only happens if you are understanding the text. So that's a really large effect size, those bridging processes, as well as the green circle, the self-regulation. And that's where the motivation comes in. Like Liz was talking about the book clubs this year, we structured them differently. We didn't say this group reads these selected books. We gave an introduction of the text available, text that actually looked like the children sitting in our classrooms, had interesting storylines, and we allowed the children to choose. And to bring it back, just, caveat, Dr. Clay was talking about, like, how do I know my students on grade level? This was actually an excellent snapshot. So we had been using BAS. So we might say to a parent, like Chris, we were saying, like, maybe my student's a level M. But in reality, that level M, if the student read that text and had excellent understanding of caves and knew a stalactite versus a stalagmite, they would be a solid M on paper. But if given a text that they didn't have background knowledge on, they may have dropped down to possibly a GHI. So it was so subjective based on what students were bringing. And it wasn't about the actual words on the paper and measurable comprehension. And now we see students that, given the choice in these book clubs, they're reading much higher than perhaps we would have thought, but if they're interested, they're able, and they're really bringing the effort to that. And what we see finally matching are those phonological and the orthographic, like all of the skills listed, we're actually, that's taking the load off of decoding so that more emphasis can be spent on comprehension. That's this slide. All right, now we're going to end with something fun. I know, I feel like
Little activity.
Okay, little activity. So this is fluency. Tim Rosinski is a huge fluency guru, and I've actually had the privilege of attending one of his conferences, like probably 10 years ago, but he's still very big in the world of fluency. So this, we hope that you see the goal of this activity as really bridging automaticity, understanding the letters and the words, and comprehension. And this is one our teachers use often. So on your paper, please play along with us. Audience, you can cheer them on. Here we go. The first word at the bottom of the ladder, the word is team. So I'd like you to write team on the first rung of the ladder. Just team, T-E-A-M. At the bottom of the ladder, we're going to climb our way up the ladder. Well, that's because we didn't explicitly, this is not a routine you're familiar with. Team, okay. All right. Working the letters in team, you are going to rearrange those letters to create a new word, and I'll give you the clue. So we'll give you clues. But the new word is a food that comes from animals. Anybody want to take a guess? Shout it out. Meat. Correct. M-E-A-T. Great.
Okay, now you need to take meat, that 4-letter word, and make another 4-letter word. Again, just rearranging the letters to mean not wild. Think about an animal, maybe, not wild.
Oh, we heard, yeah. Very good. Tame. Okay, very good. All right. Now, working from tame, we're changing one letter, and this would be to grab or take possession of something. Changing a letter. Tame, grab, take. Very good.
Good job, Chris. Okay, this time you're changing one letter, and this is another word for a story. Another name.
Correct. Yes, a tale. All right. You're changing one letter from tail, and this is the opposite of short. Very good. Now, if I were in second grade, I might point out that glued sound, all in tall. There's a lot you can do with that.
Now, this is going to take some background knowledge. You're going to change one letter, but this is a fee you pay for a service or a privilege. For example, you might have to pay $1 to cross a bridge.
Good. Yeah, very good. Toll. All right. Now, we're taking away 2 letters and changing 1. Okay, so this would be a 3-letter word, and it's the equivalent of 2,000 pounds. The weight, 2,000 pounds. Very good.
Woo. This time you're adding a letter. So you're going from a 3-letter word to a 4-letter word to mean having divided or separated something by pulling. You have divided. So past tense, you have divided or separated something from by pulling. Adding 1 letter, yes. Nope, just add 1 letter.
Controlled vowel that you all find out.
Think. No, just add a letter. Do you know, Rick? Do you know? I'm going to put you on the spot. Good job, Rick.
Torn. I know. All right, well, you like this one, Sue. Okay, we're going to change 1 letter from torn, and this is to have caused something to deteriorate. It is blank out.
Very good. That was born. And last word, you're only changing 1 letter. What teams must do together? Work. So what we started with? Team, and we ended with? Work. Good job.
All right.
And we're happy to be on the team with all of you as we do the work. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions for us?
I do have a question. So when I think about this work that we're doing and how we're preparing our youngsters for this, one of the things I wonder is how are we filling in the gaps for our older children who did not get this learning? Have we started to look at any of our students who might have had what we perceived as being learning gaps because we were teaching a different way that might have over the years through what was previously the RTII process wound up with special education services and IEPs because we felt that they were not learning, but the science has now taught us that there's a better way to have taught them. And what supports are we providing at the middle school or high school level, specifically the high school level, for students that still have some gaps with some of these reading skills?
I mean, I can't speak to the high school or middle school level, but for the elementary school level, as a 3rd grade teacher, for students that we thought were progressing along, or we have those diagnostic tools, and we have fabulous resources with a lot of support, like teacher support, reading specialist support, where we have been able to group children accordingly in our gain block to fill those gaps. So it actually has happened, in particular in my classroom actually this year. A reader that was kind of coming along proficient and reached that limit, that block in 3rd grade, and we were able to get her that support, and she's doing fabulous now with the drilling down and finding what she needed. But as far as middle school and high school, do you want to speak to that?
So we continue the intervention blocks all the way through 4th grade and 5th grade, as you know. 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, we've been working with Mr. Kaplan to try to find more opportunities for interventions. We do have reading specialists there that will also take part in this structured literacy training, as well as, and the law tells us, it is not just those that are teaching reading that need to take part in this training. As we move forward, it's actually anyone who holds that certificate, as well as anyone who has any literacy connections to the content level. So that is great. But the middle school also uses their learning time block at the end of the day, and our high school uses our bonus block to provide any sort of interventions for students that are needed.
My question is actually on the younger end, similar to Jamina's though. So like pre-K students. So I thought I heard that this requirement was starting at pre-K to 8. With that said, do we have plans to put something in place to help our pre-K students, especially for those that may not already be in a structured pre-K program, so they stayed at home and they're coming from home to school, so they haven't had the pre-K ability to learn this way?
Another great question. And yes, if a school district or LEA has a pre-K program, it is also mandated for that. However, we do not have that program, but we do preschool outreach. So every other year, Mrs. Willichuk, as well as the rest of our curriculum team, either meet with the preschools in our LEA, and then on that off year, they meet with parents of preschool students. And then they give them this same information. So we will be changing or shifting our presentation that we are doing with our families and our preschools to be in line with this. Sure?
Sorry, can I ask a foundation-specific question? Because we've had foundations in place through second grade. What's the theory behind why we stopped at second grade and now added third grade? Having a pandemic third grader, I am very foundations familiar. So I was just curious the philosophy change and how that helps or why adding that in.
So that's a good question, Mr. Carpenter. There was and Rosemary can interject if she would like. There was a process a few years ago when Foundations was unrolled to determine what third grade would then get. So currently they have 95%, which is divided into two components. There is the multisyllabic routine cards as well as vocabulary surge. So that's divided into fall and spring. That program was chosen in lieu of Foundations. In terms of like the pragmatism, it was really just the will of like its standard committee, right? There was a review of resources, and then that's the one that they had decided to go with. For continuity of programming moving forward, though, we've established that Foundations Level 3 would be the most appropriate fit for our kids in third grade. Just noticing the gaps that we see.
And we did roll it out, as Joe talked about, that continuity. We rolled it out, I don't even know how many years ago in kindergarten. Then the following year, we added it on for our first grade students. Then the following year, we added it on for our second grade students, and now we're ready to add it on to our third. And it doesn't go past third, but 4-5 has what does go past third.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies.
I know, and there's a couple more.
Thanks for playing along.
So I
All
apologize
right.
in advance. I do not have something that fun planned for what's coming. But Jen, Rebecca, and Liz, thank you so much. As you can clearly see, we are in remarkably capable hands when it comes to transitioning or shifting over to structured literacy. Our teams are ready to go, and our teachers are in excellent hands, as are our kids. So thank you all again for coming this evening and presenting. We appreciate it. So next up on the agenda, shifting gears ever so slightly. Title III ELD. I'm actually going to move relatively quickly through some of this because I know that we have gone over some of this information in the past. Just wanted to give an update in terms of English language development programming in the district, where we are currently, and then where we plan to go in the future. So just so everybody is aware, Title III is 100% federally funded. It is a supplemental program, so we do receive funding to support specific needs of English learners in our district. What this also does is it allows us to provide very specific opportunities for that population, including immigrant students, students who are migrant students, as well as students with limited interrupted formal education in the district. I will draw your attention to this slide, but ask you to kind of review it earlier or later on, rather. Identifying English learners K through 12. This question often comes up. The state has actually provided a very meaningful, I think, flowchart as to how we make those determinations. In summary, we have a brief window of time during which we make that identification possible in the district. When families come to register in central registration, we do ask them to indicate what their home language is. If it's something other than English, then we go through this process. So for the board's reference, I do have this included. But just wanted to provide some clarification around what that identification process looks like K through 12, and what steps would be taken from there on in. More specifically, what I did want to speak to is exactly what type of programming or data that we use to drive our programming for our Ls. So WIDA, which is actually Wisconsin, Delaware, and Arkansas, I believe it is Arkansas, the third state. That's what it initially stood for. When No Child Left Behind was established in 2001, this was one of the first pilot programs developed for guidance on English learners or multilingual learners. Since that time, the Commonwealth has been a member of this consortium since 2007. What it allows us to do is really gauge a valence for where students are at, if their target language is something other than English, in a number of different areas, from verbal communication, written expression, and other elements of communication. So our emphasis here in the district is that we use this information, and linked here is WIDA's site, so you can review some of the materials and resources there, that we draw on the assets of culturally and linguistically diverse learners, that the WIDA organization, as well as us, values innovation, service, something called can-do philosophy. Everything that English learners are exposed to in our district is phrased as they can do this. And these are overlays or things that we put on top of our curriculum that all teachers have available. There's also a collaborative endeavor associated with that, and WIDA's stance on social justice is very clear in terms of disrupting what the norms are for linguistic norming, so to speak, and not othering students that come into our district that happen to be multilingual. I have here for your review later on the 2 assessments that we provide our students here. So the one is called the WIDA model, which is predictive for success on a summative assessment called the WIDA Access. So basically, we probe to see where a student may be in their English language development if they've been identified using that model assessment, and then the Access one will give us a valence to see where they are on their WIDA scores. There's also a link in here to all of the information you would need to see what each of those levels means and how we move students along that continuum. Operationally, I just wanted to give a couple of updates. So our big endeavor here is to make sure that we're improving communication and programming for our families and strengthening the connection with them in our learning community. So the way that we're doing that is we're moving beyond Google Translate. We actually now are very proud to have a number of different communication interfaces that we use with our families that require translation services, as well as accessible services for read-alouds. At the building and teacher level, we have something called Talking Points. It is an app that is free for families that we subscribe using Title III funds. What it allows parents to do is text in their target language, and it will automatically translate it like it's an SMS on your cell phone. It's a remarkable tool, and now Talking Points covers every single language that is spoken in our district, including one student who speaks Faroese. So we're very Faroese. Faroe Islands, it's a Norwegian island. Yeah. So we have a really excellent resource in that. That is available to teachers who are SIOP or Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It's a big word for essentially what is best practice for English learners in my classroom. And different look-fors and different tools for planning and instructional delivery. All of those teachers are equipped with it, as well as building principals, front office staff, and district level staff. We also have in-class translation devices. I was just in a classroom not too long ago at Ridge. One of our students from the Ukraine has a translation device that works in real time, and that has been remarkably assistive, especially in a kindergarten classroom. There's just been a lot of growth with that student, and he feels much more comfortable communicating with others now that he has that, really helping to scaffold his verbal acumen there. And then we also have TransPerfect, which we've used for years for anything from translation of IEP documents to just basic communication with families. But we wanted to make sure that we're providing a number of options for them that is more teacher-focused and not necessarily outsourcing all of that. We also utilize Blackboard Advanced, Talking Points, and TransPerfect at the district level as well. Blackboard Advanced, we're working with Jess Lester in communications to make sure that we have those sent out, any announcements that we have at the district level in target languages or preferred languages for families through PowerSchool. Family engagement activities. I'm happy to announce that next year we're expanding our major offerings to 2 events per year. We wanted to make sure that families really felt that connection to their individual schools. So what we will be doing, and we have a really high rate of attendance for these events. Our next one, by the way, I have listed on there is June 1st at the middle school from 5:30 to 7:30. You are all, of course, cordially invited. If you're able to come, it's a really great evening for families. We have activities, we have games for kids, but we also give them a lot of community resources. Recently, our ELD team had attended Modco Works, as well as a seminar that they held with different community organizations, everything from the YMCA to mental health and behavioral health services. We're inviting those folks to come in, not for formal presentations, but as a resource for those families during this evening as well. So we'll have one in the fall and one in the spring. Spring will be oriented more towards what can we do over the summertime to make sure that students continue learning. as well have access to the resources that we give them during the year. And fall will be setting up for success. So that's going to look a little bit different and be more academic in focus. We'll also have a food truck at each of them. Just haven't decided yet. I believe ice cream is what we landed on last time. And then we have an initiative that we're going to be working on with building principals that systematizes more clearly PTO support. A lot of our buildings already do this, but we want to make sure that where possible, our families in Colonial are connecting with new multilingual learner families as well. So if there's an opportunity for that type of connection, we want to support that and hopefully sustain that at every level K-12. Just two quick numbers here. 132 is the current number of identified L students in Colonial School District this academic year. Just a quick note on this number. This number does fluctuate pretty routinely. A number of our students can be classified as SLIFE, S-L-I-F-E. It's an acronym you might have seen before. It stands for Students with Limited Interrupted Formal Education. If I'm a student who happens to disenroll for a period of time and come back to the district a couple of months later, that student could be coded as what we would call SLIFE. They may have certain curricular gaps. They may not have enrolled in school in their home country or wherever they happen to travel to, and we want to make sure that we're being sensitive to students. So this number is generally around this area at 132, but that's the number of students that we have currently. 35 is the number of unique languages that we have spoken in the district, which is pretty remarkable considering the size of the population. Briefly, some instructional L supports. I have a couple of links in here for your review, including those WIDA can-do descriptors, as well as what PSYOP is. So we do have a number of teachers in the district, almost our full staff, that is PSYOP trained. And effectively what that is again, it provides them the planning tools and instructional tools to make sure that they're meeting the needs of all of their learners, particularly Ls, right? So there are specific strategies for them. We also offer pull out English language development instruction with our team at every level. Our course scheduling considerations are also brought into account too when we're taking a look at the high school course offerings. We also do a consult model with our ELD team. So if a teacher suspects that there may be a linguistic need there, our teachers are always available on demand to assist them. We have newcomer support, and we'll be developing additional supports for newcomers. Newcomer refers to students who are brand new to the country and have very limited English proficiency. So those are the students with the highest level of need, and we want to make sure that we provide the appropriate scaffolds and supports for them. And we had just talked about SLIFE considerations for that. These are also county-wide considerations. Our population, in contrast to some of the neighboring districts, is relatively small, but it's still very significant. And we want to make sure that we're sensitive to all of those. So the Consortium for the ELD Council at the MCIU is working very hard to compile resources for these families so we can work in concert to help support them. And finally, in the years ahead, we're looking at professional development being a mainstay, much like structured literacy for ELD. So that's going to be a component of every possible opportunity that we have for PD, as well as PLT time where appropriate. So we want to make sure that those considerations are always met, that we're taking a look at our funding and being fiscally responsible with those allocations. Our allocations, we've been very fortunate to make sure that they are steady year to year. We actually do have additional funding that we're able to put aside to facilitate things like those family engagement nights and get additional curricular resources for our students. More community engagement through those engagement nights, those improved communication efforts and making sure that they're systematized across the district, and that emphasis on equity, inclusion, and belonging. Melissa works alongside our team tirelessly to make sure that Ls are always part of the conversation, and we want to make sure that we're doing that in a cross-curricular way.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Just a real quick question. With our summer programming, is there anything that are the students that are identified as L, are they invited to, included in the invitations that go out, or is there a separate section for them in the program over the summer they could get more like one-on-one or small group instruction for?
They are invited to all of our summer programming that we have offered. We don't have anything separate for our L students. Thank you, Mr. Paccetti. And you're going to continue to drive this as we go through the last leg?
With pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. I have a
I'm
question
sorry.
before we go. Will there be are any of our L teachers scheduled to work the program to offer support to classroom teachers if we have level 1 students that attend and teachers need additional support, ensuring that they can access the summer programming? Will we have any on staff?
So we can and will look at our registrations. All of our enrollments are set. We're making our classes currently, and we will look at those numbers. And if we do have any students that need support, we can certainly consult with our L teachers that they currently are with. Any other questions? Okay. So the final thing we're going to discuss, Mrs. Burke and I have been working together and would like to share with our board and our community all of the ways that we embed goal setting across our district. And again, goals are visited with our curriculum, and then they are reinforced with our counselors from K through 12. So we just wanted to share a little bit specifically where they are, starting at the K to 5 level. We do embrace the responsive classroom philosophy with our teachers and with our students. Responsive classroom, you need that? You want my notes? Is an evidence-based social and emotional learning approach. It basically helps students reflect on their motivations, talks about why it is important to set goals, and it helps our student distinguish among a hope, a dream, and a goal. And I have seen this myself in the first several weeks of school started, and they really focus everything in their classroom about setting those routines, setting the rules in the classroom, and then tying the rules to what do you want to learn? What is your goal for the school year? They focus them on academics, they focus them on social. They also ask the children, how are we going to achieve your hope, your dream, your goal? And then they revisit those classroom rules and say, we need to make sure that as a community of learners, we are all upholding the rules we agree to so that we can all achieve our hope, our dream, our goal. And then Mrs. Burke is going to talk about the next.
For the next 3 hours, I am going to discuss with you in very slow talk. Okay. In our K to 3 classes across the district, we do deliver the program Second Step. And this is an evidence-based program. I believe it's 6 lessons where we teach social emotional learning programs that teaches social and emotional skills such as emotion recognition and management, empathy, problem solving, bullying prevention, and goal setting. So what are your goals? In a certain situation, in specific situations, what are your goals for that situation? In grades 4 to 5, we teach Too Good for Drugs. And this is a 10-lesson program that's evidence-based to lessen risk factors to problem behaviors and also to build protective factors so that students can resist those problem behaviors. Much like with reading, when you explicitly teach skills, we explicitly work with students, giving them different scenarios. So we develop and reinforce SEL, social emotional learning, comprehensive skills framework, and that includes setting and achieving reachable long-term and short-term goals that are personal goals, making responsible decisions, identifying and managing emotions, and effective communication, in addition to learning how to refuse peer pressure. Pro-social peer bonding, and peaceful conflict resolution skills. And all of these are tied into their personal and long-term and short-term goals. At the secondary level, we follow through with what is called the Botvin Life Skills program. And again, this is evidence-based program surrounding substance abuse and violence prevention. And this is based on more than 35 years of scientific research. So it has been changed to align with national health education standards and to the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Competencies includes lessons on self-image and self-improvement. And this skill focus is on self-analysis and improvement, goal setting, and then reframing your thoughts based on the goals that you've set for yourself. Assertiveness. This skill focus in these lessons are reflecting on actions taken, the types of responses and consequences, decision-making, awareness of persuasive tactics, repertoire of refusal responses. How do you avoid that peer pressure? Verbal and nonverbal assertiveness, self-respect, and planning, and of course, goal setting along all of these lines. Again, the goal being not only to avoid peer pressure, but also to learn the tactics and how you avoid that. Unlocking your potential. This is grit, determination, and mindset. So not focusing on what I can't do, but focusing on what I can do. In these lessons, students are encouraged to evaluate their own mindsets and to think about the importance of grit and determination in setting and realizing goals in their own lives. So this is a pretty comprehensive program from K through 8th grade.
And then our final, not as fast as that. Our final slide then reiterates all the opportunities that our students and our teachers and counselors and staff have for setting goals with students. We also have career development goal setting that starts in kindergarten and goes all the way through 12th grade. So again, this is also embedded. You'll notice on this slide we have our SST, or our student support teams. They are constantly setting goals with our students, whether they are academic, behavioral, or social goals. We have our care teams at each building, and they work more specifically with the students and their families in setting goals, as well as our IEP case managers that are working on transition goals with our students. And progress monitoring allows our students to monitor their own goals. And then lastly, our counselors meet with our students for graduation plans. So we, again, just wanted to share with you how we set goals in our curriculum.
So for about 3 or 4 years, our counselors have been meeting with sophomores in high school and inviting parents in to give them some samples of how to navigate Naviance and how to start thinking about college and career readiness, whether students are planning to attend a 2 or 4 year university, go into the workforce, or possibly the military or some other type of career. With the board's support in adding Mr. Jackson as a 5th counselor, the high school now will be continuing those, they call them sophomore highlight meetings or spotlight meetings. They're going to now add junior class meetings as well as a follow-up. Smaller caseloads with the specifics to talk about goal setting. Because as parents, we're sitting there thinking 5, 7, 10, 15 years down the road, right? And while we love our high school students, sometimes they're thinking 5 weeks, 3 months down the road, right? And so we need to start having those conversations. So with the smaller caseloads, they need to build upon that. Naviance is a great tool, and it is a very powerful tool. And I think we use it well, but I think we can use it better. And for those families that really get invested in it, I think finding out what you don't like can be as valuable as finding out what you do. So I talked to Dr. Bacani, and I said we need to see, a measurable approach to the number of contacts we're making with our guidance counselors to our families. So I know our counselors visited at a recent meeting and talked about our 339 plan, but just like we talk about reading, going from the boardroom to the classroom, we have to do that with goal setting and with our counseling program. And so I really appreciate the board supporting that. And Chris was able to start recently. He started about 2 weeks ago. So we expect over the next year to see a significant difference and improve upon an already strong program.
Any questions? Great. And then the last thing we have this evening, it looks like we have a lot of conference requests. We have 5, but One is for Melissa Figueroa Douglas. She has been asked to co-present in Baltimore, Maryland, for the American Association of School Personnel Administrators. And this conference is to help those who are seeking to increase their knowledge in leadership, recruitment, selection, and retention of diverse individuals from pre-K to 12. So we are seeking approval for her to go there. And then we have 4 conference requests from our Plymouth Whitemarsh IB team to go to their global conference, which is in Toronto this summer. So we do have 4 staff members going to that as well.
And that is covered under the school improvement monies that are budgeted by the board annually. And we have, with next year's subscription, we have a new cohort coming in, a full cohort in the International Baccalaureate program. So we're very happy to welcome another 25 students into the program.
Question about Ms. Figueroa Douglas's conference. As a district, how have we tapped into the knowledge that she's going to present at this conference to align it with our own recruitment practices? If she has this wealth of knowledge that she's presenting at this forum, what are we bringing home? Particularly as this tends to be interview season and hiring season, going March, April. And I know we're not talking about hiring, and that's probably a human resources department, but are we tapping into that knowledge for our own purposes as well?
We are. Great question. So Melissa works very closely with all of our building level teams. She is also an integral part of every single school-based team, which is something new that we have just started over the past few months. We have continued our relationship with Brandon Cummings. So he has been developing the leadership skills of each of those teams. Melissa is also a part of our interview process. So she is also on round 1 or round 2 and works with our teams before we start interviewing. So one of the things that we do is we talk about what are we looking for before we start this interview. And she reminds us of practices that are best for inclusive of everybody. Sure. And that wraps up a very lengthy meeting, Mrs. Petruno. Back to you. I blame it on Joe.
Thank you. Any more board discussion? All right. Any public comment? Right. Seeing none, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.